Hi guys, my name is Ram and today's session is Linux tutorial. Now guys, this session is brought to you by a Great Learning. Now we're an amazing e-learning company that provide a lot of amazing things. And today's one of the amazing things that we are providing is this Linux tutorial session. Now, before I do begin this session, guys, I would like for you to, give me a feedback on whether you guys can see me properly and whether you can hear me properly. Now, with that feedback, I would only start with that feedback because, many times I've just rambled on without knowing if you guys can hear me or not. Okay, so leave a yes or no if you can hear me or not. While you guys are doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys something about Great Learning Academy. So, if you're looking for a course, right, you want to do a course, but you don't want to pay for a course right now because you may be a college student or you may be a person who does not have a job right now. So a good resource for you guys to start would be Great Learning Academy. Go ahead and check this out. This is really awesome. Like Great Learning Academy, type that in Google, and the first link that you get, that is the free certificate courses link. You just go to that link and you can see a lot of different things over here. Whatever course you want to learn, like let's say you want to learn data science, just type in data science over here, or let's type in cybersecurity, or type in full stack, whatever you want to learn, just type in the course and you'll find that course and you can start that course. Now, an amazing thing about Great Learning Academy is that this venture is completely free. Now, this is a side venture we are doing, but we put in a lot of effort and love. So, you guys can have access to amazing courses that will help you begin your career in whatever field you want to begin it in. Now, we have amazing courses like Excel for Beginners, Introduction to Digital Marketing, and many more courses on data science, machine learning, IT, and software. And if you are more of a creative person, we even have design and video editing. All right. So I hope you guys will go ahead and check this out. If you want to enroll for a course, enroll for a course. And once you complete this course, you will have to complete a certification. And that certificate, sorry, you won't have to complete a certification. You'll have to complete a quiz. And upon your completion of your quiz, if you pass it, then you will get a certificate. And all of this is completely free. You guys can see over here, it's free. There's no catch. The only catch is that these are fundamental courses that are for beginners. If you are a professional, then you can check out our premium courses. Okay, so that's enough about Great Learning Academy. Now, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask that in the chat about Great Learning Academy or about the topic we're going to be talking about today, that is Linux tutorial. Okay. Um, so I don't see a lot of activity in the chat. Guys, make sure to keep the chat active, but don't spam the chat. Now, I don't want to ruin the harmony of the chat. You guys should be talking to yourself, to each other, to me, and interacting. It's basically a class session. Imagine the me as your teacher, and you guys are the students, right? Okay. But I won't exactly call it a class because I feel like a lot of times people in the chat teach me a lot of things that I don't know about certain topics. Now, Linux is something I really like a lot, so I know some things about it, and that's why I can teach you. Mm. One second, I'm getting a feedback. My voice is a little cracking. All right, so guys, how's my voice now? Is it a little better? Let me open up the chat. Okay, yeah. So my internet was lagging also. So I did not see any of your messages. Now, is it still cracking? Yeah, I have to wait for a feedback from you guys. And generally, there's a lag between the chat and the message and me speaking. So, All right, so while you're giving me the confirmation feedback, somebody's asked a question. So we have uh, Aklilu. I'm an ICT teacher, and yesterday when I'm asking to my friend to find as an IT manager part-time work, he told me to know Linux. So here is the time for me to, yesterday's. Oh, this is amazing. So you are here to learn about Linux. So here's what I'm going to give you guys the basics of Linux so that you have a strong fundamental core about what Linux is, right? You're not going in blind to learning what Linux is. So this is what I'm going to be doing in the session today, guys. Basically, I'll be going through the small theory part about Linux, how it came up, what are the benefits, why should you be using it, and a lot of the core concepts that are utilized within Linux. And I will also be showing you guys how you can use it for yourselves. Now, over here, I've launched a virtual box in which I have Ubuntu running. Ubuntu is a Linux operating system. Okay, so I'll just type in try Ubuntu. There's no need to install it. It's going to take a long time. So while this is working out over here, what you guys, I mean, like we can continue with the session. Now, if you guys want the full experience, right, like how to install Linux and everything on a virtual machine, I would recommend checking out our Linux course. If you especially know Hindi, it's definitely going to help you out because it's a course in Hindi where I teach you guys about Linux. It's the same content. It's just I go in a little bit extra on how to install, Ubuntu operating system in the virtual box if you have Windows and if you don't have Linux operating system. All right, so I hope I'm not confused, you guys. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, so first let's start off by discussing what is an operating system. So, like the name suggests, operating system. Now, a lot of my answers to people who ask me questions is look at the name. Think about what the name does, what the name speaks about. Like if you talk about cybersecurity, what is it? You take the cyber part and your security part. That tells you what cybersecurity is. It is security related to cyber domain, which is related to culture of computers, the compute itself, internet, virtual reality, and all those kind of things. Similarly with operating system, look at the name. It's operating system. So it's a system that allows us to operate, right? So that can be your basic definition of what an operating system is. But let me make it a little bit more clear. Whenever you want to use a specific application, you don't develop hardware just for it. At least you don't do it on an individual level. Maybe on in research level or in a larger scale where you are making a production line for specific, specific hardware for specific software. That time you can do it. But imagine laptops we have. Imagine the phone you're using. Imagine the PC you're watching this from. Right? They are general purpose systems. They're general purpose systems that allow you to do multiple things. You can watch videos on it. You can play games on it. You can open up a Word document and use that Word document to do whatever you want, right? So they're general purpose. So how do you take all of these different applications like your video player, your web browser, and use it in one hardware? So that's where your operating system comes in. It basically acts like an interface between your hardware system and the applications that you want to run. So let's say there is a user and he wants to use an application. And he wants to use it on his own personal system. So what he does is he uses the operating system to access this application. And this operating system basically utilizes all the resources there in the hardware to run this application. So that's what the basic of what an operating system is. It's kind of an interface between a user, the application and the hardware. You can have multiple applications running on whatever the operating system is, and that operating system takes all of the resources and divides them up for these multiple applications. That's what it does. Now, there can be multiple types of operating system. You have your Android operating system. Now, the Android operating system is actually based on Linux. It is Linux, basically. And then you have Windows, then you have Mac OS, and you can even have OS for different hardware. Like your TV has a different OS. Your watch, if it's a smartwatch, it can have its own OS. So a lot of different hardware can have its own OS that runs multiple different applications on it. You can have an operating system that is used just for some applications, maybe one or two applications, right? So I hope that gave you guys a clear idea on what an operating system is. So I hope, there's no Sherlock deduction needed here, that Linux is an operating system. So if we talk about Linux, I mean, Linux itself is not an operating system, but it allows us, but it basically forms a large part of an operating system. If I wanted to go into specifics, Linux is a kernel. Linux kernel, when it is combined with a lot of different packages, forms an operating system. If you talk about Ubuntu, Ubuntu has a Linux kernel, but it has a lot of different libraries and packages also that differentiate it from other Linux operating systems. That's why I've mentioned over here that Linux is a set of open source operating systems, as you guys can read over here, but it's not exactly that. It is like that, but not exactly that. And you can think of Linux based operating systems as operating systems like Windows and Mac. They're used for a lot of different types of hardware, especially your PCs, your servers, your laptops, your phones, right? You can have operating system on them, and Linux is one of the operating systems you can use on them. Now, it is Linux kernel based OS are the ones that you can use on them. All right, so it basically provides us an interface to use specific programs with the help of the hardware. All right. Okay, so I hope you guys know what Linux is now. Linux is a kernel. Now, you guys would be asking me, what is a kernel, right? So I will explain to you what a kernel is. Just know that Linux is a kernel that, when it's taken with a lot of different packages, a lot of different libraries of functions, forms an operating system. Ubuntu is a Linux based operating system that has a Linux kernel and a lot of different packages. Now, if you take other Linux based operating systems like your a good example would be CentOS or RHEL. Those are also Linux-based operating system, but they have different packages that they use. So that's why they're separated away from Ubuntu. All right, so let's talk about the Linux history. Why was Linux developed? So see, the thing with Linux is that Linux was developed by this one guy called Linus Torvald, but he was not the only one developing it, but he was the major guy behind it. So in 1991, when he was in college, yeah, so this guy's like an amazing prodigy. He was able to develop the Linux kernel back in 1990s in his college dorm, right? He made it there. He wrote it from scratch. Now, why did he make Linux? So he made Linux because he wanted to have an amazing operating system that was open source. At that time, there weren't a lot of options for people, amateur developers, a lot of people who wanted to use free operating systems. They didn't have a lot of options back then. So Linux became one of those options. It became an open source operating system, like that allowed people to, get an operating system for free. Generally, what was used, one of the first operating systems was Unix. Now, Unix was an amazing operating system that was developed in the late 60s and early 70s, if I remember correctly. Uh, Now, I don't exactly remember who created it, but it was made by a company, and that company made it a proprietary software. What that means is that it was a paid operating system. Now, Unix was amazing. A lot of different people used it, but there was no good alternative to it. So, what Linus did, Linus basically took the philosophy of Unix, how Unix works, what is the Unix architecture, and it's a working philosophy. He took all of those things, he made a mind map, and he tried to emulate the same behavior by writing code from scratch. So you might hear Linux and Unix as same things, right? But they're different. I'll go in a little bit more into detail when we talk about Linux versus Unix. I have a whole section for that. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about the benefits of using a Linux based operating system. So it's open source. This means that, if you're using Linux, um, sorry. Actually, before I start this, there are a lot of questions in the chat that I did not answer.
All right, so Dinesh Mukesh asks, how many languages should we learn to start programming as career? Well, Dinesh Mukesh, you don't really need to know many programming languages. What you do need to know is one programming language, pick it up, and learn the fundamentals of coding with the help of that language. Now, generally, the language people take is C++ because that's a language that is used a lot in the industry, and it it lets you get a better understanding of how the whole thing works. But if you're a beginner, I would recommend Python. Python is very easy to learn, and you can start with that. Sunil is asking for an administration course on GL platform. Well, your voice is being listened. I will recommend that to the relevant team. So yeah, Deepu's asking, is Linux a kernel or an OS? No, it's a kernel, right? It's not an OS, but you can see that kernel is a part of the OS, right? You don't have a kernel without an operating system. Okay? So Linux is a kernel. An operating system has a lot more parts than just the kernel. When I talk about the architecture of Linux, you guys will get a better understanding. Now, Arpita has asked which is better, Ubuntu or Red Hat. Now, I'll get into that when we're talking about all the different Linux operating systems we have. So Deep was asking, please schedule a live class for OS specifically. Okay, yeah, noted. We'll think about it in future. Yes, Android is basically Linux, the Android operating system. Okay. So Sunil is asking, so can we get a Linux administration course on the GL platform? Yes, you can definitely go ahead and check out any of our courses that are available to you on the GL platform. Now, the GLA platform, that is Great Learning Academy, does not have a Linux course, but the Great Learning Premium courses, there is a Linux-based operating course. But I'm not sure if it's exactly what you're asking for, but feel free to check it out. That is on greatlearning.in, not in Academy. If you want a free course, go to Academy. All right. Great learner is asking, I learned C language. Is it necessary to learn Linux? Now, that depends on what you want to learn, right? So, if you're going to Linux administration, Linux is really important. If you're going to DevOps or infrastructure, then Linux is important because Linux is used a lot in the industry these days. Okay, so that brings me back to the benefits of using Linux. So, one of the greatest benefits of using Linux is that it's open source. That means you don't have to pay anything to use Linux operating systems. Now, that again, there is a big asterisk over there because some Linux operating systems you do have to pay for, like Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Now, that is an enterprise Linux operating system. You have to pay for that because that's their own thing. When you talk about open source, you generally mean that it's something that you can use. Um and make it your own, and you can even distribute it as your own product. Now, Ubuntu is open source and you guys can definitely use that. So as a beginner, I would recommend using Ubuntu for Linux, right? And now, highly flexible. So when we talk about Linux, we can see that it's a very highly flexible operating system. Now, I've said that Linux is a kernel, but it's about knowing it, right? Like it's about the sense of it. You can call it an OS, but not necessarily. Okay. So when I say it's highly flexible, Linux is highly, you can, change it to your requirements. If you want to use Linux on your phone, you can use Linux on your phone. You're probably using it right now. You can make changes within Linux so that it fits a different environment. So that is very easy on Linux because it is not a managed operating system. That means that there is no one trying to define your experience in how you use Linux, unlike Windows and Mac OS, where they're completely locked off. You cannot make a lot of changes. It's very difficult to do so. Now, they have their own reasons because they want you to have an amazing experience. With Linux, it's not generally about having an amazing, relaxing experience. It's about well, it's about the configurability, the flexibility, the being open source, right? So that way you can change it to any shape or any use that you want. Now it's very lightweight. So you have Linux that is completely which is way more lightweight than compared to other operating systems. Now, if you compare Linux based OS like Ubuntu versus Windows, now Windows operating system might take around 10 GBs or 16 GBs, whereas your Ubuntu might take only like 5 GB or maybe 4 GB. So there you can again see that it's a way more lightweight than Windows or any other operating system. Now, even there, you can have even more lightweight operating systems like Ubuntu, which is very lightweight. That's like around only 1 GB. That's the size of it, and it gives you a lot of chances to fit your requirements perfectly. You don't have to use that one general thing that Windows or Mac. You can use any different kind of Linux you want to. Now it's highly configurable, which comes back to the flexibility part. You can the the amount of configurability you have increases your flexibility. When you talk about Linux, there is a lot of settings that you can change. You can, make the firewall your own thing. You can only allow certain IPs to access your system. Maybe you can, change the UI. Maybe you can change the, internal mechanisms. You can create your own functions that you can use with the call of your hand. All of those kind of things are possible in Linux because Linux allows you to do that. It's an engineer's playground. It's a software engineer's playground. I can't put it in better words. With Windows and Mac OS, you can't do that very easily. In Windows, you have a little bit flexibility more compared to Mac OS, but it's still limited. It's still difficult to do all of that, right? All right, so let's quickly finish off the rest of the benefits. Now, fewer malware because not a lot of people use Linux, so fewer amounts of malware are developed for it. Like I think there are billions of people using Windows, but you might have only like millions of people using Linux. So not many people develop malware to attack Linux. You still have them, but is this lesser number? And again, with the high configurability, you can make it your own. So if somebody's made a malware for general Linux environment, then it would be difficult to penetrate your wall because you set up your own Linux. And awesome for development. So for development purposes, generally Linux is awesome in a lot of different senses. Like you can develop using Linux, you can develop on Linux environments, you can set up Linux infrastructure when you're software developing. Like in deployment, if you're using any server on which you have your software, you can use Linux as a server, as the operating system in which you run your software so that you can give it to the end user. So that is again why it's awesome for development. All right. So it's let me just finish these off. So it's stable now compared to other operating systems. It's a little bit more stable. It has a large community because it's open source. You'll have a community where people keep on contributing, like different packages and features that you can use, and it gives you performance. Since it's lightweight, it does not have to spend a lot of energy on unnecessary things. It can maintain good performance. All right, so those are the benefits. Now let's talk about Linux versus Unix, because I know a lot of you guys will be confused between what's the difference, right, between Linux and Unix. So let me go into a little bit more detail. So here's Unix. It's an operating system. So both are operating systems. Like Linux is also an operating system. Like you call it a kernel, but you can say that Linux is an operating system also. You can say it, right? So Unix was an operating system developed by Ken Thompson. That's the name. Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. So these are the two fathers who made Unix back in 1970, in C language. Now, it influenced the development a lot of popular operating systems such as Mac, Solaris, and AIX. So your Mac OS is basically based on Unix, right? And yes, the company's name was AT&T. So it was developed under Bell Labs, if I remember correctly. That was under AT&T. Yeah. So it was a paid operating system. So you had to pay licensing fee to use Unix, right? Now Linux, right? Linux is an operating system, but it's not the same as Unix. It is Unix-like. That means that when Linus, the guy who made Linux, when he was making Linux, he made it in the image of Unix. He wanted to emulate Linux in such a way that Linux would look like and behave like Unix. More the behavior part, where he wanted to create that something that acted like Unix but wasn't Unix, right? Because Unix is a paid software. He wanted to make it free. So Linux's behavior is same as Unix. It's just that it's free. It does not share any source code with Unix. You do not have any source code with Unix and Linux that are the same. Linus developed Linux from scratch. Now, I hope the names are not confusing for you. Linus is the person who came up, who developed Linux. So he basically took the S out and put X in the end, but it shares the design principles with Unix. So Linux and Unix have the same design principles. One of the major differences in philosophy is that when Linus developed Linux, he wanted to promote open source software. That is, software that can be easily and without any problems be distributed and freely be distributed and changed. So Unix is a complete operating system, whereas Linux is a kernel. When it is packaged with different distributions, it becomes a complete operating system. So I hope this answers your question. Linux is Unix-like, but it is again the kernel. And when you take Linux kernel with different distributions like packages and libraries, you can make it into an operating system of that flavor. All right, so let's look at the different Linux distros we have. We have Fedora, we have Elementary, Ubuntu, Arch, Debian, OpenSUSE, Red Hat. Sorry, that was Alpine, not Arch. Yeah, then we have Arch, Red Hat, and CentOS. So you guys can see there are a lot of different distributions. Now, the one I would recommend you guys start is Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu is awesome. A lot of people, different people use it. I think it might be one of the most popular Linux available. Red Hat is used a lot in the industry for enterprise purposes. And CentOS and Red Hat are same. The difference is they have the same source tree, but CentOS is supported by a community, right? You even have Amazon Linux also, and Arch Linux is pretty lightweight. Alpine is one of the lightest Linux out there. Like it promotes lightweight use, and Elementary is a very special use case over here. Elementary is basically based on Ubuntu, is the same thing, is just is taking the same skeleton and everything, all the packages and everything the same. The only thing they change is the UI, because they want to make the UI like Macs. So they take the Ubuntu, like everything from Ubuntu, they just change the UI, right? So these are most of it. I would recommend sticking to Ubuntu for now. You guys will learn about the rest of them as you learn more. All right, so I hope I answered the Unix and Linux confusion. Okay, Deepu's asked talking about Garuda OS based on Linux. Okay, I haven't heard of it, but thanks for telling me. I'll check it out. How Linux is used for embedded systems. So embedded systems, I think you're talking about like IoT and those kind of things, right? Like where you have hardware and you write firmware to run the machine. So embedded systems can be things like chips, and these chips can be part of IoT devices and those kind of things. So Linux in that environment would basically act as an OS, where the chips would be the hardware, and if you want to run any specific apps on using them, then the OS will act as the interface. Again, what I described earlier. Sakshman is asking, does Linux can be more helpful for backend rather than Windows? Now, if you're a burgeoning software developer, I would recommend checking out Linux, because you will see Linux in future, because Linux is used a lot in the industry. If you're a backend developer, you will hear about Linux and you will use Linux. So it's a good thing to know about Linux. Even if you don't go into depth, you should know the basic commands that I will cover in this session. Okay. So here's the Linux architecture, where you have the hardware, the kernel, the shell, and the applications. So the shell is basically the one that acts as the interface. Linux kernel is the one that is responsible for all the processing, data management, and IO device management and the process scheduling, all of those things will be done by the kernel. Shell is the one that allows us to basically run any applications. So if you want to run Firefox, you will go to the shell, you will open the shell, that can be a terminal, and in the terminal, you will log in as a user. And once you log in, you will basically, run all the commands that are required to run your application. When you want to run the application, the request will be delivered to the kernel, and the kernel will take the resources from the hardware and allow you to create the application. Once it creates the application, it will show you so in the shell. Now the components. So you have the hardware again, you have the kernel. Within the kernel, you have schedulers, process schedulers that schedule certain processes, manage the queues. Then the file system. Now file system is important because this is the one that is responsible for storing your file in the hierarchical structure, right? So the security aspect is also controlled by the kernel, the networking and drivers. And one more thing that I don't think I have mentioned here is the memory management. Memory management within the hardware also will be done by Linux. So the kernel basically handles the system, basically it together with the system libraries, the software and the user processes is the operating system. So your operating system will be Linux kernel, your system libraries, these libraries will allow, define the behavior of your system, how it uses those libraries to do all the processes, and the system software, what kind of software you're using within that system, and if there are any user processes that the user has run, all of that will form the operating system, and that will all be based on the hardware. Mm, Small dreams. Okay, there's some questions. Yes, Shahid is asking, will there be a practical session? Yes, I will do a practical session. I was just going to the theory, hoping for this to work. The virtual box. One second, guys. Okay, just let me see if we can run the terminal in this. See, if we can't run this, what I will do is I will basically get a VM. So this is Ubuntu. I'm running it on VirtualBox over here. All right, so we have a terminal over here. So Jaga is asking, is Ubuntu CLI or UI? So I think you're asking about whether Ubuntu has CLI, command line interface, or UI. It has both. You can, work from the UI itself, or if you want, you can work with the CLI. All right, so it's working. All right, so we'll come back to this to do the practical session. Let me just finish off the basic concepts and let me see if there are any other questions. So can I tell in Hindi? You can tell in Hindi in the chat. That's not a problem. Sir, practical karoge kya? Yes, we will be doing practical. Is it possible to explain Linux terminologies by taking some examples from Windows OS, which would ease out the understanding of the basic concepts? So okay, fine. So when we go through the basic concepts, I'll give you an analogy with the Windows. So we have the kernel, right? So even with your Windows system, you have a kernel. Now the kernel is basically the one that is responsible for all the processes management. Now you have a lot of processes running in your system. Running a PowerPoint, running VirtualBox, running a browser, all of those are processes. And all of those processes are managed, like it is managed by the kernel. So the kernel will basically make sure that these processes are running when they are asked to run, and they will shut down when they are asked to shut down. And they will be scheduled. So whenever a process happens, there are only limited amount of resources the system can use. So what the OS or the kernel does is it basically schedules processes in a priority queue where whatever process has a priority gets executed first and then the rest of them. This way you can utilize the resources you have on your system, as well as execute all of your processes. Now, if you had like maybe unlimited resources, then you could you wouldn't need to do all of that. But here you need to do that. And memory management is also an important part that kernel does. Is basically managing how the memory is being used by the different processes, and basically all the resource management, and any networking. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so that is basically kernel, does all the heavy lifting of an operating system. Then you have the shell. Now, I've already talked about this. Now, the shell is basically the user interface, where it's not the user interface. It is basically your access to the kernel. Like, you use the shell to perform actions in the kernel. When you want to give any command, uh, you will give those commands to shell, and shell will communicate it to the kernel. And once the kernel knows about them, that's when it will execute them and give you an output in the shell. Then you have the file system. Again, I've already talked about what a file system here does. It's basically responsible for managing where your files are stored. It does so in a hierarchical manner. And then we have a package manager. Now, the package manager is basically that manages all the packages. Now, the processes are managed by the kernel, but the packages, when you download some software from the internet onto your system, it is a package that you're downloading. In Windows, when you download a movie, right, you're downloading the package of the movie. That movie is a package. Similarly, on Linux, also, when you download a movie, it's a package that you're downloading. And any software that you download is also downloaded as a package, right? If you're installing Firefox, you first download the package and you run that package. So you download the file and you run the file to install it, right? So every thing has a package manager. Every Linux based operating system has a package manager. You can have your RPM package manager, and then you have your Debian package manager that is used for Ubuntu. They basically manage how a package is downloaded and everything, okay? And then you have the users themselves. This is pretty self-explanatory. And in Linux, generally, you have the super user, that is the root access. You can think of that as an administrator in Windows. In Windows, administrator has a lot of different rights that a normal user does not have. We call these privileges, right? Similarly, a root user or a super user in Linux has a lot of privileges that a normal user does not. So you have such distinction between different kinds of users. Okay. Then you have processes. Now, the processes are basically all the things that you do, right? You are running algorithm on your system. That's a process that you're running. Let me give you an example with Windows again, since somebody asked about it. When you are playing a video, right? So that's video is being played as a process. So similarly, even in Linux, when you're playing a video, that will be run as a process. Okay. Okay. All right. So now let's go to installation and setup. Okay, guys, I'll tell you how to install it, but I won't go into detail about it because it will take a long time to install it. Okay. So this is what you're going to be doing to install Linux. What we are going to do is first, there are a few prerequisites for it. Like, you need Ubuntu image and you need virtual box. Okay. So Ubuntu over here is basically your image. Like, Ubuntu image is basically some is the blueprint for running the Ubuntu operating system. Now, you can run this on your own system. You can dual boot your own system to have both Windows and Ubuntu. But if you don't want to do that, what you can do is you can download VirtualBox. Now, VirtualBox is something that allows you to have an operating system within an operating system. So as you guys can see, I am using Windows over here. This is Windows 10. And instead of downloading Ubuntu image and running the Ubuntu image, what I'm doing over here is basically I am using Oracle VM VirtualBox. I'm creating a virtual machine that allows me to um, run Ubuntu within Windows. As you guys can see, that's what I'm doing over here. All right. So first, go to your browser, type in Ubuntu image. Second, go to browser again, type in VirtualBox. So you need to download these two things. And there are a few more prerequisites that I want to tell you guys. Basically have at least 4 GBs of RAM, because when you're running this operating system on a VirtualBox, you need to allocate certain memory to it. And that's why it's recommended to have at least 4 GBs of RAM. I would recommend you to have at least 8 GBs of RAM, but that's all right. 4 GBs is fine too. And have at least 20 GBs of free hard drive space. Okay. Or you can launch a VM on cloud, AWS Azure. So instead of having the VM and using your own resources, like using my laptop's resources, what I can do is I can borrow from Amazon. So Amazon will allow me to get a virtual machine and I can access it, remotely. Okay. So for that, you need to go to services and EC2 and launch a virtual machine. Okay. So now both are easy. I will explain the VirtualBox one. Basically, download VirtualBox and download the latest desktop image. Once you download the image, right, come back to your Oracle VM Virtual Manager. You have to install the VirtualBox also. Once you open the VirtualBox, this is what you will see. This is the dashboard. Now you need to click on New, and once you click on New, you will need to give the name of the operating system. You can type in here Ubuntu. It will automatically detect Ubuntu. The type will be Linux itself. You can click on next. Okay. All right. So it says that I already have one. Okay. Over here, you're gonna define the memory size for this virtual machine. So select the amount of RAM in megabytes. So we will assign it 1 GB. Now I would recommend you to assign 2 GB so that it runs smoothly. You can see this is my max limit. I only have 8 GBs of RAM. So that's why I recommend having more GBs of RAM. Okay. Then click on next, create virtual hard disk now. Click on create, choose VDI and click on next. It will basically launch your virtual machine then. Okay. So you should see it running, and you can install it directly, or you can try it out. Okay. Now I'm trying it out right now because the installation process is very long. As in it takes time to fill up that bar. Okay. So that's why I've chosen to go with trying it out. Trying it out basically means not installing it, just running it. And that's why it's so slow over here. All right. Till this loads, let me see what questions you guys have. Kernel in so Samba is asking what is kernel in simple words. In simple words, it's something that it's an engine. You can think of it as an engine. Every car has an engine, right? That runs the car. So kernel is something that runs the operating system. All right, that's the simplest terms I can tell you. It runs all the processes. It manages all the processes and everything. So Ajay is asking, sir, I installed the virtual machine and VMware in my PC, but how to start Linux on my PC? Okay, so I hope the process I gave you. All right, so let me just tell you guys again. In new, you will give the name Ubuntu 1. Next, you will assign the size. Click on leave this as it is. Create virtual hard disk. Click on create. Click on VDI. Next, dynamically allocated. Yes. Click on create. This is the amount of size. You're giving it 10 GB. Now click on create. Once you create it, uh, over here, you can start it up. Now it will generally ask you a location. So it will ask you, can you give me the location for my Ubuntu? So you can select over here. It will either automatically detect. If it won't detect, you need to select on this folder button. Click on add over here. So this is basically you telling VirtualBox where the image for Ubuntu is. So this is the Ubuntu image that we wanted to select. So you need to go to that location. This is my location. It's here in Linux folder. So I'm going to click on it. This is the image that I downloaded. So it's a .iso file. Okay. Let me select it, and you can see that it's I can choose it. And one sec. Okay, it should generally give me a start option. All right, so this is probably not letting me select it is because I already have it running over here, right? I already have the Ubuntu running. That's why. So once you select it, it should start running. It will give you two options. It will ask you either want to install Ubuntu or try Ubuntu. I will recommend installing Ubuntu. It's a very simple process. You can go ahead and do that. All right. So once you're in Ubuntu, go to show applications and get the terminal. Just type in show applications and it will ask you type to search, type in terminal. So we're using the terminal because this is the command line interface where you type in all the commands and it basically acts as a, what do you say, as an interface to the kernel, right? What do we want to do? All right, so this is what should open up for you. Over here, let me explain it a little bit. Now, this is the max size I think it can go. All right, so over here you guys can see Ubuntu, right? So Ubuntu at Ubuntu. This means that this is the username, and generally this is the nomenclature where it will first show you the user. Right now the user is Ubuntu, and then it will show you the name of the machine. Now the name of the machine again it's Ubuntu itself, so that's why it's showing this. So now we have our Linux environment opened up. Now there are a lot of very simple processes that we will learn about. Okay. So how many minutes do we have? We have 15, we have 20 more minutes. So here's what, guys, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain all the basic commands there are. Then we will get to the questions that you guys are asking, right? That way we can complete everything. So the first command that I want to show you guys is the ls command. Or let me show you the pwd command. No, let's show you the ls command. So what the ls command basically does is basically it lists everything in a directory. All right, so let me explain one more thing. This basically tells you where you are. That squiggly line you guys can see, this is our directory. So if I do pwd, all right, so yeah, so we are in /home/ubuntu. So this is the first command I taught you. Okay, so pwd basically lists the current directory. Now, what is a directory? So let me give you guys a better example. I hope you guys know what a directory is from, should have Linux. Yeah, this is Linux. Let me open up this folder that I've created. So this navigation bar over here, you can see, right? If I click on it, it shows me users, my name, desktop, and then the folder name. So desktop is the location, this, and this is the name of the folder, right? So basically, this is the directory. Linux is the directory. You can call it as a folder also. You can call it as a directory also. So over here, we are in /home/Ubuntu. So we are in the Ubuntu folder or in Ubuntu directory. Now the pwd command basically tells you in which directory you are. In Windows, we can see that by going to the navigation bar, right? Where we just go up here and we look at it, right? But when you want to check it in Ubuntu, you can do it by typing the pwd command. Now, even in Ubuntu, you can do that with the UI, but we are doing it with the command line interface because those are the basic commands you will need to know. Then I will type in the ls command. So I'm in Ubuntu directory. Now I want to see what is there in the Ubuntu directory. To see what is there in a current directory, you need to type in the ls command. So this command stands for list. If I press enter, you will see a lot of different folders or directories. I have desktop, I have documents, I have downloads, I have music, pictures, public, templates, and videos, right? If I open up files over here, you guys should see. Yeah, so again, we are in home and you guys can see the directory we are in. We are in home. We can go to desktop, we can go to documents, we can, go anywhere we want. So over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head to desktop. Now, when you want to go to another directory, you type in the command cd. So this is a command you'll be using a lot to traverse through all the directories. Now, cd will allow you to go to whatever directory you want to go to, right? So right now I want to go to desktop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write over here desktop. Now this is case sensitive. If you don't mention the capital D, it will not take you to desktop. Let me show you, because it won't know. If I type in, it tells me bash cd desktop, no such file or directory. That means that, this is not the correct name. I will type in cd again and put in capital D E S K T O P. And if I press enter, you can see that my directory has changed from home to desktop. So if I do pwd again, you can see slash home slash Ubuntu slash desktop. Oh, okay. One second. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So we are in desktop now. Okay. So this is how you move from one directory to another. Now, what happens when you want to go back to Ubuntu? So what you can do is, there are two ways to go back. Just type in cd and copy home and Ubuntu. Copy them, cd, and paste them. Why is it not giving the paste option? All right. So I'll just write it down. Home slash Ubuntu. Okay. So you can see that I am gone back. If I do pwd, I am in Ubuntu. So again, we'll go back to desktop. All right. Now, if you want to clear the screen, you can type in clear or just press Control L. If I write ls and I want to not show anything, I'll press Control L. Okay. Now in desktop, if I do ls, we can see that only this thing is there. Okay. And there is another way to go back, that is cd slash dot dot. Okay, that way also, if I do pwd again, we are here. So cd that dot dot basically allows you to go back and front. Okay, so now what are these dot dots, right? So let me tell you about that. When we do ls hyphen a, now remember we are in home directory, so desktop, documents, all those directories were there within that. If I do ls hyphen a, you can see there are a lot more files over here than just the one we saw, desktop, documents, music, and everything. If I do ls again, same thing, you guys can see the difference. Now what is the difference here? Hyphen a is the one that lists everything. If you guys remember, in Windows we have hidden folders, right? If I come back to Windows, you go to view, and I hide, I can once again, there should be an option over here. So you can see hide selected items, right? If I hide the image, basically the image gets hidden, and we can reveal it also by clicking on hidden over here, apply. Okay, so this is to make everything hidden. This is not to reveal anything. Okay, so if I click on hidden items, it will show me the hidden items there are, right? Similarly, over here, ls-a gives you all the hidden items. Now in Ubuntu, all the hidden items start with dot. So your cache, .config, .gnu, png, .local, all these are your hidden files. So if you want to create a directory that you want to hide, then you create it using .sh. That brings me to the point of creating a directory. So first I will head to desktop using the cd command. Now I will create a new directory. So I'm going to use the command mkdir. Mkdir basically stands for make a directory. Okay, mkdir space, I'm going to give this the name. I'm going to name this fun. So if I do an ls now, I can see that a new directory has been created. Okay, I can create another directory. I can call this not fun. And if I do an ls again, I can see not fun as another directory. And I can head to any of these directories. Okay, if I do an ls, there's nothing inside of this. Okay, so that is me creating a directory. Okay, now if I want, I can go ahead and make a hidden directory. We'll call it dot in ice cream. So if I do an ls, I can't see ice cream, but if I do an ls-a, I can see ice cream. And you guys can see this dot dot and dot, right? So dot refers to the current directory, and dot dot refers to the previous directory. So when we do cd dot dot, we are actually telling the system that we want to go to dot dot, that is back. Okay. All right. So those are some of the basic commands. Now let me just tell you how to remove directories. Just type in rm and type in the name of the directory. Right. So once again. Yeah, so type in rm hyphen rf. So this will remove your directory. If I do an ls, I can't see fun anymore because I have removed it. So use the command rm hyphen rf. This is to basically forcefully remove a directory. Okay. All right. So that is for removing a directory. Now let me show you how to create a text file. So if you want to create a text file, just type in touch and name a file. So let's say you want to create hello.txt. So you'll type in touch hello.txt. If I do an ls, I can see hello.txt has been created. Now what happens when you want to edit this hello.txt file? So generally in Windows, you will use a notepad editor, right? You will use a notepad and you will edit those files. Yeah. Now here in Ubuntu, we can also use notepad editors. Some of the notepad editors names are Nano. One of the name is Nano. Nano is one of the editors in Ubuntu, notepad editor. So how do we open the hello.txt file in Nano? We type in the command nano and the name hello.txt. This will open up my file. So you guys can see the name, and whatever I want to enter, I can enter hello, how are you doing, my audience? I hope you guys are enjoying my session. Yeah. Now to save this file, what you have to do is there are a few shortcuts. You guys can see the shortcuts over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write. Okay, one second, guys. Just hold on. Now, if you want to save this, it's very simple to do so. Just type in Control O and it will ask you what's the name you want to give this file. If you want to change it, you can go ahead and change it by going with the arrow key. If you don't, just press enter. Now you've saved it, so it tells you wrote one line. Now you can exit it by pressing Control X. So I've exited it. So if I do an ls, I can see my hello.txt. If want to view the content for hello.txt, I can again type in nano and go to hello.txt, right? Okay. And you can use the cat command also for this purpose. Just type in cat hello.txt and press enter. It will show you on the console itself. Okay, so those are one of the few commands. Now there are some necessary commands I want to show you guys. Those commands are your downloading commands. Okay, so first we have the sudo command. So sudo is not a command that you use by itself. You use it with other commands. Sudo is basically super user access. Now, if you want to install something, you need root access. So let me show you the installation command. So let's say we want to install Git. Now Git is a version control system. Some of you guys may know about it. If I type in apt install Git, it says could not open lock. That means that we don't have the permission. What we're going to do is we're going to type in sudo apt install Git, and I'll press enter, and you guys can see I can start installing. It will ask me, do you want to continue? I will say yes with Y and press enter. So it will install Git for me now. So let me explain the command over here. Sudo basically gives you root access. It's like going to allowing administrator privileges. If you start a game and if it's not running, you run it with administrator access, right? Or whenever you're downloading something, it asks you, it gives you a pop-up. Do you allow this to do it, administrator? Okay, so that's kind of like how sudo is. Okay, so let me just stop this process. So whenever you want to stop a process, press Control C and it will stop a process. Okay, I'll Control L to clear the screen. And another great thing about the terminal you're using is you can just press the upper arrow key and it will show you all the previous commands you have. Yeah, go down, see all the commands you have typed. Okay, or if you want, you can just type in history. It will show you all the commands you've used. We used 40 commands so far, and you can check the history of all the commands you used. Okay. All right, so that was the sudo apt install git command. Let me explain this. So here you're getting super user access or root access. Apt is your package manager. In Ubuntu, you use apt. In Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you will use yum instead of this. Okay, but we are not using Red Hat Enterprise in Linux, so we are just going to go to apt. Now, apt is the package manager which allows you to download packages and remove them. So sudo apt install is the command and git is the package. So I'm telling Ubuntu, please install git. I'm specifically telling it to apt. Okay, apt is your package manager. All right. Now, once you do install git or any specific thing, all right, while it's installing, I can go through a few commands. No, actually, okay, it was almost done. Huh? All right. So, all right, so we'll let it download Git and install Git for us. I think it's done. Okay, so we messed it up. That's why it didn't install properly. But, installed somewhat. So, okay, so now another command I want to teach you guys is sudo apt update. So what this command does is it basically refreshes your apt. You are updating your apt package manager. If there are any new repository lists, so here's how package manager works. You basically, package manager has a lot of different repositories. These are links in which your files are located. So if you want to download Git, it will have a specific link for it. It will go to that link. So you need to be connected to the internet and it will download the Git from that link. Now it has a lot of different lists for a lot of different packages, but it doesn't have almost everything. Sometimes you need to update it to get new lists inside of apt. So that's why we use the update command. So this will basically update your APT. So you guys can see it's getting new lists and it's storing those new lists in itself. Yeah, so we updated that. I think this is a problem because we haven't installed Ubuntu. That's why. Yeah, so once you update your package manager and you want to update your instance, like how we do Windows updates, right? If you want to do that, then you need to type in sudo apt upgrade. So this basically updates your Ubuntu. So what this will do is it will check all the packages that you have installed. Now using apt, you've installed a lot of packages and there are a lot of packages already. If you want to update all of them, you will type sudo apt upgrade. Generally, this is how you do it. You first update it and you press in the logical operator and you type in sudo apt upgrade. So this will first update the list and then it will upgrade everything. Yeah. Okay. So that's the end of it. Now, one last thing I can explain to you guys is how to get root user access for a long time. Type in sudo su. This will give you root user access. You can see how it changed from Ubuntu at Ubuntu to root at Ubuntu. Here we don't have to type in sudo again and again. I can just type in apt install git and it will install git for me. Yeah. So yeah, see, so it installs git for me without having to use root. Now I can exit out of it to type in exit. Okay. All right. So guys, these were the basic commands. This should help you start learning with Linux. If you have any doubt, whatever, something is not working, whatever error you're getting, like you're getting error, let's say, just type in some gibberish and says this command not found or something is not working, you can just copy it and Google that thing. That is one of the best techniques. A lot of software developers work using that philosophy. Okay. So that was the end of it. Now let me do a Q&A. All right. Now let's do a Q&A. Let's see all your questions. So Hanan is asking, sir, I want to learn web series. So I think you're talking about web development. So we do have a series on that. Faizan is the one who teaches all of this. He's an amazing instructor. You should check out his videos on HTML, CSS. Great learning. Yeah, HTML, CSS, great learning videos. Go ahead and check those out. They're amazing videos. They will definitely help you get started with the web development. So Ajay, I think, is giving an analogy. If Linux is an organization, kernel is a manager. By changing manager, we form different organization. I think you're a little confused, or maybe I'm confused. Here, Linux and kernel. See, the thing is, the kernel. See, a kernel will just your Linux will basically be the kernel itself. So you can't have Linux as the organization and kernel as a manager. Your kernel is Linux, right? It is the main core part of an operating system. S. Mishra is asking, speak in Hindi. Hindi is a national language. I know, but we have a lot of different people who don't know Hindi in India itself. And this is not just for India, man. This is for all over the world. There are a lot of people who come and watch these videos. And I want to make sure that everyone can, understand this. Now, we will come up with a Hindi session also in future, so you can stay subscribed and watch that. But yeah, we want to do Linux in English also so that we help out everyone, not just people who speak Hindi. All right? Dual boot is better or running them as VM. Depends on your requirement, Deepu. If you want to dual boot your system, that way you have Windows as well as Ubuntu, so you can work on both the things. Or if you just want to use Ubuntu just for like a few minutes, or you just want to check out something, you can use it virtual machine also. Depends entirely on your requirements. Can I use Kali Linux? Yes, I personally don't have experience with Kali Linux, but you can do it. Is it free to use AWS for VM? Yes, it is free, but only to a certain extent. So you can use the free tier. Like there are some systems that you can use for free. You need to Google that and check that out for yourself, or check out any of my Docker videos. I go into detail about this. Okay. Joseph is saying your wallpaper looks nice. Thank you so much. Jaga is asking what is meant by bash. So bash is the terminal that we use. This terminal is our bash terminal. Now this bash terminal can be used in a lot of different places. When you're talking about Git, a good example is using Git bash. That is you're using the bash terminal on Git, right? On your Windows system. So using a bash terminal over there. It's a type of terminal where you can use specific commands with that terminal. Okay. You have sh also. So somebody's asking what is the difference between community Linux and enterprise Linux. So Ajay, community Linux are those Linux that are completely open source and you can use them. Enterprise Linux are basically those Linux that used by enterprise, like companies, big organizations, like your Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that is RHEL. A community version of that is your CentOS. Mr. Anonymous is like, do you know me? No, do not know you. I do not know you. So Ayush is asking for a full course. Yeah, we will come up with that course. In meantime, you can subscribe and watch any of our other videos. And so somebody wants a Red Hat course. All right, that's in our list. Stay subscribed to get any notification on what we will be doing in future about it. So Deepak is asking many times it hangs during installation. So to avoid that, you need better memory. Generally, if you don't have enough memory, it gives you a lot of issues. How to delete the command history? How to delete the command history? Now, I'm not exactly sure of that. I've never had to do that. You can Google it and check it out. So Small Dreams is asking which video will be next. So I think you're asking about the sessions that we do. You can check out the sessions that we do on Great Learning. Again, on Great Learning, you don't have just the courses, you have a lot of different things. Once you come to the website, you guys can go ahead and check out the upcoming live sessions. So you guys can see today was intro to Linux, and tomorrow we have predicting IPL winner using machine learning. And then we have intro to Node.js also for all the web developers. Right, so we have a lot of different live sessions that we do. You can view them and you can subscribe from here, register from here itself. So you want specs of dual boot laptop, Kashyap? I think Kashyap, I've seen you a lot in my sessions. Dual boot laptop requirements, again, you don't need much for that. I would recommend 8 GB RAM, and that's it. 8 GB RAM and whatever processor you're using, i5, 5th gen, that should be fine. Actually, you can dual boot in a lot of different, even in very small memory space, you can do it. Just make sure to use a lighter Linux. So if you want to download a very light Linux, go and get. I think Ubuntu is not being used anymore. I think it's Ubuntu now. Ubuntu is one of the. It's a variation on Ubuntu that you can use. Or if you guys want, check out Arch. Arch is also pretty cool. Type in Arch Linux. Yeah. Okay. So somebody's asking, what are the different types of shells that we can use available in Linux? So the different types of shells we have is your bash shell, that is your born again shell. Then you have your KSH, I think it's KSH. Yeah. Now SH is definitely there, so you can use the SH shell wherever your bash shell is not there. And I'm not sure, but I think it's KSH as one of the other shells that are available. So hit meta is basically given a command to delete everything in a directory, sudo rm-rf slash star. That deletes everything in the current directory. All right. So I'm going to take last question. Career in Linux. You can do a lot of different things with Linux. You can become an infrastructure engineer. You can become a Linux administrator, and you can even go into DevOps. And even cloud engineers need to know Linux. Generally, Linux is like a side skill, not a main thing. Now you can become a Linux developer also. That is something if you're passionate about it, really. Okay, so guys, that was it for this session. I hope you guys really enjoyed what I taught you, got something out of it. I mean, I definitely got a lot of things out of this session. I understood a lot about you guys. Okay, and if you want more on Linux, as I see a lot of you guys are requesting in Hindi, we are releasing a Linux course in Hindi very, very soon. So you guys go ahead